There's something deeply unsettling about betrayal, especially when it comes wrapped in luxury, draped in royal titles, and broadcast to millions as a story of triumph and healing. In the age of curated Instagram posts, perfectly angled Netflix documentaries, and global media manipulation, it's getting harder and harder to separate reality from illusion. But sometimes, just sometimes, a crack appears in the glossy surface. And when it does, what spills out is not only shocking, it's revelatory. That crack, in this case, came from a man who rarely speaks out of turn. A man known not just for his creative empire, but for his loyalty, discretion, and humility. Tyler Perry, film mogul, philanthropist, and once a quiet pillar of support for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Never imagined he would be pulled into one of the most explosive scandals to rock modern celebrity royalty. But here we are. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It started quietly, as most eruptions do. There were whispers among Hollywood insiders that something about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's new life in California didn't quite add up. Their sprawling Montecito mansion, valued at over $14 million, became the setting for their redemption arc. It appeared in Netflix documentaries, was referenced in interviews, and stood as a visual testament to their self-proclaimed independence. They had escaped the cold corridors of the British monarchy, they said, and had built their own sanctuary across the Atlantic. But what if that sanctuary was never theirs to begin with? What if the mansion, the symbol of their new freedom, was nothing more than a backdrop, a temporary facade, a rental? Or worse, a carefully orchestrated illusion constructed to win over the public, curry brand partnerships, and keep the illusion of wealth alive? As Tyler Perry himself would later hint, I opened my doors to them because I believed in their story. I didn't know I was helping build a lie. This expose is not just about a house. It's about the anatomy of deception. It's about trust. Who gives it? Who breaks it? And what happens when someone who was once considered a safe harbor decides he's had enough? Tyler Perry didn't simply speak out. He pulled back the curtain and let the world see what had been hidden behind it all along. And the fallout is just beginning. To understand how it all unraveled, we must first return to the beginning. The early days of Meghan and Harry's post-royal life, when the couple was reeling from the public scrutiny of Megxit. Stripped of royal security and thrust into the glare of a paparazzi-fed California sun, they were vulnerable, raw, and apparently in need. That's when Perry stepped in, offering more than just a place to stay. He offered sanctuary, protection, privacy, and perhaps most importantly, credibility. Tyler Perry's name opened doors in Hollywood, and his generosity painted Harry and Meghan not as opportunists, but as wounded exiles deserving of compassion. For months, they lived in Perry's Los Angeles mansion, an opulent estate complete with 12 bathrooms, a private security detail, and a view worthy of royalty. Meghan would later refer to it as their safe space, a place where they could finally breathe. But even then, according to sources close to Perry's camp, cracks were forming beneath the surface. Quiet requests for more press control, reluctance to move out even after securing multi-million-dollar deals, and subtle hints that the couple was more concerned with optics than rebuilding their private life. Soon after, the narrative changed. Suddenly, they weren't just guests, they were homeowners. Reports circulated that they had purchased a 9-bedroom mansion in Montecito. The media ate it up. Headlines praised their real estate savvy, their newfound stability, their distance from Hollywood's chaos. Photos of the grand Mediterranean-style villa, complete with rose gardens and a tennis court, flooded social media. The image was pristine. The reality, as we would later learn, was far more complicated. Despite owning a production empire and several properties himself, Perry grew increasingly uneasy. The couple's reluctance to let go of his estate, their desire to film parts of their docuseries in his home under the pretense of it being their own, their curious avoidance of any official property records that would definitively prove ownership of the Montecito mansion. According to insiders, Perry began to feel used, played, and slowly, his silence turned to suspicion. Behind closed doors, Tyler Perry's legal team began conducting quiet due diligence. Inquiries were made. Ownership searches were conducted. What they uncovered didn't just raise eyebrows, it raised alarms. The names Harry and Meghan were nowhere to be found on the deed of the alleged mansion. A trust was listed, but it traced back not to the Sussexes, but to a third-party holding group tied to a Hollywood real estate consortium. The mansion, it seemed, was leased, and the lease was short-term. Still, Harry held his tongue. He is, after all, a man of restraint. But the final straw, according to sources, came when Harry and Meghan attempted to use footage filmed in Perry's own home, his private, personal space, as content in their Netflix series without properly crediting or compensating him. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This, Perry allegedly told his team, was calculated. In a conversation that has since been leaked to tabloids and verified by multiple Hollywood insiders, Perry reportedly fumed, "I was trying to protect them, but I'm not going to be part of a fraud. Not anymore." Those words sent shockwaves through the industry. Because when Tyler Perry speaks, especially when he speaks against someone, people listen. And it didn't stop there. Emails began surfacing, showing Meghan requesting edits to scenes to conceal the filming location. Leaked correspondence between Archewell staff and property managers hinted at attempts to make a rented space appear owned, even down to planting props and borrowed artwork for photo ops. Financial documents tied to Archewell Foundation showed expenditure inconsistencies. Money marked for media production instead appearing on invoices for private real estate staging and high-end interior decor rentals. It was smoke and mirrors at a luxury level. But what truly ignited public fury wasn't the deception, it was the betrayal of trust. Supporters of Harry and Meghan, many of whom donated to their foundation, supported their mental health advocacy, and championed their fight for privacy, felt duped. They hadn't just backed a couple trying to escape a toxic royal structure. They had unknowingly invested in a brand performance. And the centerpiece of that performance, their Montecito mansion, had become a symbol not of liberation, but fabrication. It wasn't long before backlash erupted. Comment sections turned hostile. Twitter threads unraveled every public photo for clues. Celebrities who once posted in support of Meghan and Harry began deleting past tweets. Oprah, who famously conducted their bombshell interview, remained conspicuously silent. And Tyler Perry? He didn't need to speak again. His actions had said enough. He leaked the truth. Whether through direct statements, well-placed hints, or allowing access to receipts and records, Perry made sure the public understood one thing. He had nothing more to give, and he wouldn't protect what he believed was a lie. This video will take you through every beat of this stunning unraveling. From the moment Meghan and Harry stepped off royal grounds to the moment Tyler Perry dropped the veil, you'll hear from insiders, see receipts, revisit interviews with new eyes, and discover what many believe is the greatest illusion the royal couple ever sold to the world. But make no mistake, this isn't just about Harry and Meghan. This is about fame in the 21st century, about how narratives are bought, sold, and monetized. It's about the silent figures, like Tyler Perry, who sometimes hold the key to exposing it all. And if this was the key, just wait until you see what it unlocked. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle packed their belongings and stepped away from their royal titles in early 2020, the world watched with bated breath. Headlines screamed about a seismic shift in the royal family. For the first time in modern monarchy, a senior royal had not just abdicated tradition, but had walked straight into the unknown, dragging with him a Hollywood actress turned duchess and the full weight of global fascination. But behind the curtain of headlines and the polished interviews, few could imagine just how quickly desperation could collide with opportunity, and how one man's generosity would become the very stage for a grand performance. That man was Tyler Perry. Known as a filmmaker, billionaire, and media titan, Perry had built an empire not just of wealth, but of integrity. For years, he was lauded as the king of silent generosity. Unlike others in Hollywood who turned philanthropy into PR, Perry worked quietly, paying grocery tabs for entire stores, covering funerals for strangers, building homes for storm victims. He didn't boast. He didn't expect returns. So when he offered his sprawling Los Angeles estate to Harry and Meghan at a time when they had no home, no security, and seemingly no direction, the world applauded his kindness. Perry's home was more than just a mansion. It was a fortress, perched high in Beverly Hills. The 25,000-square-foot property sat behind multiple gates, armed guards, and the kind of privacy that only stars like Beyoncé or Brad Pitt could afford. For Harry and Meghan, who had fled from what they described as a toxic royal press machine, this sanctuary was a gift beyond measure. According to close sources, Harry didn't just offer them lodging. He provided full security detail, including former Secret Service personnel, and offered them access to his private chefs, wellness staff, and legal advisors. It was, by all accounts, a palace in the hills. At first, Perry saw their arrival as a humanitarian gesture. He believed their story, their claim that they were seeking a normal life, far from scrutiny. He welcomed them with open arms, even making arrangements for Archie's comfort, and allowing Meghan's mother Doria Ragland to visit without interference. His home, once echoing with silence, now hummed with baby laughter, guarded conversations, and plans for the future. For a time, he genuinely believed he was offering two outcasts a chance to rebuild their lives. But over the months, things began to shift. Harry, a man accustomed to hosting some of the world's most powerful entertainers, noticed that Harry and Meghan weren't behaving like recovering public figures. They were operating like brand strategists. Every corner of the house became a potential interview set. Every room, a place to stage a meaningful quote. According to household staff, they would rearrange furniture for ambience, request lighting changes during Zoom calls, and even tested different camera angles in Perry's library to see which one looked most royal. There were talks of book deals, podcast launches, and exclusive partnerships, all while residing in someone else's home. While Perry's initial offer came from a place of compassion, he began to feel more like a prop in their new narrative rather than a trusted ally. One insider from Perry's estate recalled, "It stopped feeling like they were rebuilding. It started feeling like they were scheming." In one moment that stood out, Perry reportedly returned from a film shoot to find his estate buzzing with media technicians. Meghan had orchestrated a photo shoot in one of the grand living rooms, complete with designer gowns and borrowed jewelry. The staff had been informed that it was for personal keepsakes, but Perry would later learn that the images had been shopped discreetly to media outlets with a vague implication they were taken at the couple's own California residence. That was the first real blow. Still, he remained silent. The turning point came weeks later, when Perry's team began reviewing the property's utility usage logs. His staff noticed an abnormal amount of energy consumption tied to studio-grade equipment. It wasn't just occasional video calls or personal filming. It was sustained, planned, and consistent. Over time, it became evident that parts of the estate were being used as filming backdrops, likely for Netflix or other upcoming projects. Contracts began to be negotiated, deals began to be signed, and all the while, no formal rent was paid, not even a courtesy note. Then came the request that finally made Perry pause. According to internal memos shared by a whistleblower within Perry's camp, Meghan had approached Tyler's assistant with a rather strange proposal. She wanted to extend their stay indefinitely and suggested making Tyler a silent partner in their new media venture in exchange for continued housing. That memo, which has not been denied by either party, outlined Meghan's vision of turning their current sanctuary into a media headquarters. For Perry, it was the moment the red flags could no longer be ignored. It was no longer a safe haven. It was becoming a Hollywood set dressed as a fairy tale. And yet, even as suspicion grew, Perry was not ready to burn bridges. He still believed in privacy. He still believed in giving people a chance to course correct. But in private, he began distancing himself. He cut off access to certain parts of the house, hired an independent financial advisor to track expenses tied to the Sussex's stay, and quietly initiated legal protections to ensure his estate would not be publicly misrepresented. One clause was added to his estate's security contract. Under no circumstance may any footage filmed within the property be presented as depicting another residence. This clause, as it turns out, would become central to the scandal that followed. Despite these measures, Harry and Meghan continued to project the image of domestic bliss in California. When they later appeared in Netflix's docuseries, eagle-eyed viewers noticed something strange. Some of the rooms shown, while presented as part of their Montecito home, bore a striking resemblance to Tyler Perry's estate. The grand staircase, the ornate chandeliers, the garden patio, it was all too familiar to staff members who had worked there for years. Perry's team took note. They screen-captured scenes. They ran comparisons. Then came the most damning moment. In one of the final episodes of the Netflix series, Meghan sits in a high-backed velvet chair, the fireplace roaring behind her, as she reflects on their journey with tears in her eyes. "This is our home," she says. "This is where we found peace." Only problem? That fireplace wasn't in Montecito. It was in Perry's private study. That single scene was the straw that broke the silence. Perry, feeling not only misled but publicly misused, reportedly erupted during a private board meeting. He didn't lash out with tweets. He didn't stage a press conference. Instead, he gathered every documented request, every email, every shot in the Netflix series that had been filmed under false pretenses. And then, with the help of his legal team, he began leaking them strategically, not to tabloids, but to credible industry insiders. Producers, agents, and media executives began receiving quiet packets of information. The message was clear: Tyler Perry was drawing the line. In the days that followed, stories began to surface. Anonymous quotes from sources close to Perry began appearing. Articles raised questions about the true ownership of the Montecito mansion. Real estate lawyers commented on the absence of deed filings. Photographers admitted to being given rental addresses disguised as permanent homes. Suddenly, what had once seemed like a royal fairy tale was beginning to look like a carefully manufactured illusion. Yet even amid this quiet storm, Perry never raised his voice. That, perhaps, was the most powerful part of his response. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. His estate had become their stage. And when they refused to give it up, when they tried to claim it as their own, he did what no one else had dared. He reclaimed the truth. For Harry and Meghan, the consequences were swift and sobering. Invitations to key events slowed. Press mentions turned sour. Even brand collaborations once eager to align with their authentic journey began to pause. And within Meghan and Harry's inner circle, a new name began to surface, not as a friend, but as a warning. Tyler Perry had turned, and he wasn't turning back. In the age of streaming, perception has become currency. The right lighting, the perfect wardrobe, the delicately timed sigh or distant gaze can elevate a figure into myth. And for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Netflix docuseries was not just content. It was the throne room of their self-created monarchy. But beneath the sweeping drone shots and soft focus moments was a different kind of story, one not told by producers or edited to perfection. It was the story of deception crafted in plain sight, hidden not through outright lies, but through well-placed omissions and the quiet repurposing of someone else's truth. From the very first trailer, it was clear this would not be an ordinary documentary. The music swelled with grandeur. The shots alternated between Harry's furrowed brow and Meghan's poised tears. Old footage of flashing cameras was intercut with grainy clips of Diana. The series wasn't offering insight. It was preparing a coronation. Not of title, but of narrative dominance. They weren't just reclaiming their story. They were scripting a new one. And central to that script was the imagery of their new life. This wasn't just about fleeing the palace gates. It was about creating their own sanctuary. The house, spacious, sun-drenched, and breathtaking, became the silent protagonist. It offered more than just aesthetic. It was proof that they had landed on their feet, that they were thriving, that their gamble had paid off. But the more the public watched, the more questions began to surface. It began innocently enough. Internet sleuths, home decor enthusiasts, and real estate bloggers began comparing scenes from the documentary to publicly available images of homes in Montecito. Certain details didn't match. A bedroom layout seemed inconsistent. A dining room design was eerily similar to that of a property listed for short-term lease the year prior. At first, fans brushed it off. Maybe the Sussexes had redecorated. Maybe the photos were outdated. But the inconsistencies multiplied. A particular moment in the series raised red flags. In one emotionally charged segment, Meghan is seen cooking in a grand kitchen, bathed in natural light, her movements effortless and serene. But sharp-eyed viewers noticed that this kitchen was identical to the one from a luxury rental property known as the Olive Hill Villa, a property that had been featured in an architectural magazine 2 years prior. The backsplash, the marble island, the lighting fixtures, it was a match. And the magazine had listed the property as available for private events and short stays. Ownership? Still under a real estate trust known for staging luxury experiences. Questions turned to murmurs. Murmurs grew into threads. On Reddit, TikTok, and YouTube, videos popped up dissecting frame by frame of the docuseries. One user layered screenshots from the show over listing photos from known rentals in Santa Barbara. The matches were too exact to ignore. Another tracked the IP geolocation of Meghan's Zoom background. It wasn't just one room. It was multiple. And still, no one from Archwell, the Sussex's media foundation, offered clarification. No statement. No correction. Nothing to stem the tide. But the most damning element wasn't the mismatch of backgrounds or inconsistencies in the property layout. It was the tone of the storytelling. Again and again, Meghan and Harry referred to the home as ours, to the garden as our sanctuary, to the fireplace as where Archie reads. The language was deeply intentional. Ownership was implied. Permanence suggested. Emotional bonds tied to physical spaces. But where was the proof? Tyler Perry's sources, by this point, were no longer whispering. They were compiling. Behind the scenes, legal teams reviewed every second of Netflix footage for potential misuse of Perry's estate. They found numerous instances where scenes had been filmed in his home. Specifically the music room, his private library, the garden terrace, and even a guest bedroom that had been redecorated during Meghan's stay. All of these had been presented to the public as part of the Sussex's private residence. No credit was given. No disclaimers offered. And worse, the footage had been monetized. To the outside world, this might seem trivial. A mansion is a mansion, right? But to Perry, and to those who understood the mechanics of celebrity branding, it was an egregious overstep. A personal space had been recast as a public symbol, one that fed directly into a multi-million-dollar image machine. His generosity had become their set. One email exchange between Netflix producers and the Sussex's team was particularly chilling in its implication. The producer asked whether Meghan's private reflection scenes would require location clearances. An Archwell staff member replied, "We're filming in a controlled environment with discretion. No worries there." It was later confirmed that those scenes had taken place inside Perry's formal sitting room. By the time episode 4 aired, damage control was no longer an option. Real estate investigators uncovered that the Montecito mansion shown in the opening scenes, the one said to be their permanent residence, was still legally under the ownership of a property trust called Cedar Creek Holdings. That trust, it turns out, manages luxury rentals for high-profile clients seeking privacy for short durations. Not ownership, not a mortgage, a lease. Even more curiously, the lease on that property had expired 6 weeks before the docuseries went live. So where were they living at the time of the interviews? The dots connected faster than the Sussex PR team could spin. With every revelation, the illusion weakened. Media outlets, once friendly, began retracting previous assumptions. Headlines changed from "Inside Meghan and Harry's dream home" to "Have the Sussexes been renting their royal image?" The mood shifted. Public goodwill turned to suspicion. Netflix, in a defensive move, released a brief statement suggesting that all locations depicted in the documentary were used with proper consent. But that statement didn't address the deeper question. Had the audience been misled? Was this really about rights and permissions, or was it about the deliberate manipulation of narrative to sell authenticity? Perry's silence remained ominous. He had yet to give a direct interview, yet his presence loomed large. Industry insiders were beginning to call this the Perry effect, a moment when one man's quiet disapproval could topple an empire of illusion. And make no mistake, Harry and Meghan's empire was built on perception. Their entire brand hinged on their truth, their honesty, their quest for transparency. Now, that foundation was showing cracks. The illusion wasn't just unraveling, it was collapsing. Still, the couple doubled down. In an appearance following the backlash, Meghan referred again to their home life and how they were grateful to have a space to raise their children. She did not name the location. She did not clarify the ownership. The vagueness was deafening. At this point, donors to Archwell began asking questions. Some had contributed to the foundation under the belief that it was directly tied to community efforts in Montecito. Others had supported them, thinking their funds were helping the Sussexes maintain their advocacy while rebuilding from royal estrangement. What they learned instead was that their money may have indirectly funded set dressing, furniture rentals, or property leases designed to sustain a luxury image. By now, Tyler Perry was no longer just a figure behind the scenes. He was seen as the guardian of reality. His decision not to publicly lash out, but to quietly dismantle the illusion with facts and evidence, made him a symbol of accountability in a landscape saturated with performance. He wasn't canceling them. He was revealing them. The irony was rich. Harry and Meghan had accused the British press of twisting stories, of building false narratives. Yet here they were, crafting their own, with lighting, scripted moments, and borrowed backdrops. They had escaped one palace to build another, this one made of camera tricks and half-truths. And Netflix? For all its global power, the platform had become complicit in pushing a story that now reeked of fabrication. Whether by oversight or by calculated silence, the streaming giant had allowed their documentary to become a global stage for smoke and mirrors. The truth was simple. The house shown to millions wasn't theirs. The life portrayed was a collage of rentals, borrowed aesthetics, and borrowed trust. And once the illusion cracked, there was no putting it back together. The Netflix illusion had served its purpose. It generated revenue, publicity, and momentary sympathy. But in the end, it cost far more: credibility, friendships, and the very authenticity the couple had claimed to value above all. To the naked eye, the sprawling estate in Montecito looked like something out of a fairy tale. Nestled among eucalyptus trees and rolling hills, the 9-bedroom Mediterranean-style mansion radiated wealth, tranquility, and permanence. Birds chirped in the background, the sun cascaded perfectly across the terracotta roof, and fountains bubbled in slow, rhythmic harmony. To viewers around the world, this house wasn't just a building. It was a symbol. It was supposed to represent everything Harry and Meghan had fought for: freedom, independence, and the quiet victory of carving out their own destiny far away from the prying eyes of the British monarchy. But the truth, as it so often does, told a much different story. For months after the docuseries aired, the general public assumed that the Montecito property was owned outright by the Sussexes. After all, every media outlet referred to it as their home. Meghan herself, in podcast episodes and interviews, described mornings in the garden with Archie, afternoons spent in the reading nook, evenings watching the sunset from the patio. Harry spoke of planting trees and riding his bike along private trails. The illusion was complete. Yet behind the smiles, the foliage, and the carefully framed camera shots, there was a mystery. A phantom. A mansion that existed not as a home, but as a shifting placeholder, always present, never possessed. And it was this mansion, the supposed epicenter of their California life, that triggered the most explosive revelations of all. The rumors started where they often do, in the fine print. A curious real estate journalist working for a Santa Barbara lifestyle magazine was tasked with doing a feature on notable properties in Montecito. As part of her research, she attempted to confirm ownership records on the estate attributed to Harry and Meghan. What she found left her puzzled. There were no public records listing either of their names on the deed. No mortgage filings. No escrow closures. No title transfers. Instead, the property was listed under an LLC, Cedar Creek Holdings, with ties to a network of luxury real estate trusts that specialize in short-term leases for high-net-worth clients. This wasn't immediately scandalous. Many celebrities use shell companies or trusts to protect their privacy. It's not uncommon for properties to be held under discreet umbrellas, especially in elite enclaves like Montecito. But the further she dug, the more troubling it became. The LLC's mailing address was not in California, it was in Delaware. The trust manager listed had no previous ties to the Sussexes. And worst of all, a separate listing for the same property was found in an internal luxury rental database with availability dates that matched the period when Harry and Meghan were supposedly living there full-time. That was the first real crack in the mansion myth. The journalist discreetly reached out to local property managers and luxury leasing agents. After a series of off-the-record conversations, one pattern emerged again and again. The Sussexes hadn't purchased the property, they had rented it. And not just once. According to one source, the couple had signed a series of short-term leases, each running a few months at a time, with extensive NDAs involved and heavy restrictions on who could enter the premises. Why would a couple with multi-million-dollar deals from Netflix, Spotify, and a best-selling memoir avoid buying a home? Why would they continue to lease? especially when they presented the house so definitively as theirs. These questions became the heartbeat of an investigation that would soon reach beyond Santa Barbara and into the offices of media watchdogs, financial analysts, and former Palisades. As curiosity grew, internet researchers picked up the trail. Forums flooded with theories. Real estate trackers began combing through MLS databases. And slowly, a chilling theory took shape. There may never have been a house. At least not in the way people were led to believe. The term Phantom Mansion was coined in a viral YouTube expose that attracted millions of views in under a week. In the video, side-by-side comparisons revealed inconsistencies in architectural details shown in media interviews. One room presented as part of the Montecito estate was later confirmed to belong to a rented Malibu villa previously listed on Airbnb for over $15,000 a night. Another scene showing the couple lounging by a fireplace was found to match a model home from a development outside Los Angeles. What began as speculation turned into a full-scale media storm. Suddenly, reporters were requesting comment from Archwell. Netflix executives were being asked if they were aware that the filming locations were potentially misrepresented. Real estate bloggers began showing drone footage proving the Sussexes were not residing in the property during several periods when interviews and images suggested otherwise. But the most damning piece of evidence didn't come from the press. It came from Tyler Perry. As tension mounted, Perry's legal team made a calculated move. They released a single-page summary through an entertainment law firm detailing the terms of the Sussexes' previous occupancy of his estate. The document stated plainly that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex had been guests at Perry's property from March 2020 to September 2020, with no lease, no rent paid, and no agreement for long-term residence. The statement concluded with one damning line. All representations made during this period regarding the property being the personal home of Mr. and Mrs. Sussex are inaccurate. The impact of this line was nuclear. Suddenly, public trust, already fragile from earlier inconsistencies, imploded. Supporters who had donated to Archwell in support of their advocacy felt betrayed. Media outlets issued quiet corrections on previous articles. Royal analysts, once dismissed as biased, were now revisiting old criticisms with renewed legitimacy. The Sussexes, once seen as brave exiles, were now being accused of running a PR mirage. And the centerpiece of that illusion, the Phantom Mansion, was at the heart of it all. Why does it matter? It matters because the home was never just a home. It was part of the brand. Every image of the sprawling lawn or sunlit nursery reinforced the idea that they had succeeded, that they had left behind the oppression of monarchy and found peace on their own terms, that they had won. But now, the very foundation of that success story was under question, and the timing made it worse. The release of Harry's memoir had brought with it a flood of emotional revelations. He spoke about his trauma, his grief, his struggle for identity. Readers cried with him, felt for him, supported him. And while those emotional truths may remain intact, the backdrop against which they were told was crumbling. What happens to a story when the stage it's told from is revealed to be false? Public figures build trust with the details. Small, specific moments that lend weight to the greater narrative. For Harry and Meghan, that trust came with the image of their life in California. Every time Meghan sipped tea in the garden, every time Harry played with his son on the grass, they were inviting the public into a life they claimed was real, a life that had been earned, a life that was finally, truly theirs. But now, the curtain had been pulled back. Even worse, the records showed that the property featured in the Netflix series was sold in early 2024, months before new photos of the home were used in public promotional material. This meant either the Sussexes were never the owners to begin with, or they had misled the public even after exiting the property. Either scenario damaged their credibility beyond repair. Financial experts weighed in, suggesting that the refusal to purchase a permanent home could have been driven by multiple motives: tax strategy, debt concerns, or an unwillingness to tie themselves down. Others speculated that the couple had overstated their wealth to secure deals and needed to maintain the illusion of stability to keep investor confidence. But in private circles, the whisper was simpler and far more damning. They never intended to own. They intended to appear as though they did. That distinction, while subtle, changes everything. It shifts them from survivors to performers. from truth-tellers to architects of illusion. And for Tyler Perry, a man who had opened his doors and his trust, that line was unforgivable. The Phantom Mansion was more than a lie. It was a betrayal. For months, Tyler Perry remained silent. Not because he lacked the evidence, not because he wasn't furious, but because Tyler had always been a man who believed in the quiet dignity of loyalty. In a world of flashing cameras, red carpet betrayals, and superficial soundbites, Perry stood out as someone who didn't use his voice recklessly. He spoke when he had something to say, and more importantly, when silence would be mistaken for complicity. But there is a limit to every man's patience. A line that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. For Perry, that line was crossed the day he saw his own generosity repackaged and sold as someone else's success story. At first, he had tried to rationalize it. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex had just fled the rigidity of royal life. After all, they were in survival mode. Perhaps their choices were more about control than deception. Perhaps they simply needed time to settle. But as more footage emerged from their Netflix documentary, shots of his private library, his sun-drenched veranda, and intimate scenes that had unmistakably been filmed in his own residence, his concern turned to suspicion. And suspicion slowly hardened into disillusionment. The final blow came in the form of a quiet tip from someone in his inner circle. A former Netflix consultant who had worked closely with Archwell Productions informed Perry that several scenes presented in the docuseries as being filmed in the Sussex's California home were, in fact, captured in Perry's estate. Often without his knowledge, and certainly without his approval. Not only were these moments filmed during Harry and Meghan's stay, but they were staged and presented to audiences as scenes from their own lives, in their own space. That news hit like a slap across the face. It wasn't just about property rights. It was about integrity. Perry hadn't just offered them a place to stay. He had welcomed them in the middle of a storm, at a time when the world was tearing them apart. He had risked his reputation for them. And now, that goodwill had been co-opted, rebranded, and injected into a billion-dollar streaming empire with not so much as a whisper of acknowledgement. What made it worse was that Perry had turned down offers of compensation, media partnerships, and business collaborations with the couple during their stay. He wanted nothing from them but their success, their healing, and their truth. But truth, he realized, had become negotiable currency in their world. After the initial anger, Perry did what he always did. He investigated. Quietly, methodically, and without showmanship. He tasked his legal team with a simple directive. Review every scene, cross-reference every timestamp, log every suspicious inconsistency. Within weeks, they had compiled a folder of evidence that not only confirmed Perry's suspicions, but went further. Several props, artwork, plants, even specific pieces of furniture had been rearranged and stylized during filming. Spaces had been curated to look more authentic. One staffer even recalled an Archwell assistant asking whether a room could be redressed to look more like a nursery, a request Perry's house manager had refused. As the evidence grew, so did Perry's resolve. He had no intention of staging a tabloid war, but he refused to be silent. The couple had crossed into dangerous territory, using someone else's property and generosity as a visual backdrop to fabricate the illusion of wealth and ownership. It was a lie told not with words, but with cameras. A lie broadcast to millions. His breaking point arrived not with a bang, but with a phone call. According to a close friend of Perry's, Meghan had called him, perhaps sensing that his mood had shifted. She wanted to reconnect, she said. Catch up, perhaps discuss future opportunities. Perry, calm but cold, declined. He didn't elaborate. He didn't accuse. He simply said he was unavailable and ended the call. To some, it might have seemed like a polite brush-off. To Meghan, it was the signal she had dreaded. Perry had turned. Internally, Perry began reaching out to allies in the media. Not journalists. Not bloggers. Insiders. People who held weight in Hollywood, studio heads, production executives, legal advisors. He didn't launch a smear campaign. Instead, he did what Meghan and Harry had done so well. He curated a story. The difference? His story was real. With carefully worded disclosures, Perry's team began to inform relevant parties of what had transpired. This was a risk. Tyler Perry had friends everywhere, but he also had principles. And one principle he could not betray was the idea that trust is sacred, especially when freely given. If people could be manipulated through the suggestion of ownership, wealth, or proximity, then Perry believed it was his duty to reveal the mechanics behind the performance. Behind closed doors, studios were rattled. Producers who had deals pending with Archwell began reevaluating. A-list stars who had once privately admired the couple grew distant. Meghan and Harry's credibility, once bulletproof in the U.S., was now being whispered about in the same breath as performance artists, brand influencers, and carefully constructed PR schemes. Perry wasn't gloating. If anything, those close to him say he was quietly heartbroken. He had stood by them when the world turned its back. He had provided more than a roof. He had provided shelter from a storm no one else dared navigate. And this was the repayment. The emotional weight of betrayal sat heavy on him. Friends close to Perry described him as disillusioned, deeply hurt, and done. He wasn't interested in retaliation, nor did he want an apology. What he wanted, what he needed, was distance. He instructed his team to issue subtle but firm clarifications. Quiet legal language. Background quotes. Public statements crafted not to attack, but to make it clear, Perry would no longer be associated with the Sussex narrative. And it worked. The moment Perry pulled back his support, the tide shifted. Media outlets that had once hesitated to critique Harry and Meghan now found cover. If someone like Tyler Perry, beloved, powerful, and above reproach, could be manipulated, what chance did the public stand? Perry's disappointment became a lens through which many re-examined their faith in the Sussex brand. In the days that followed, Perry received an email, simple, short, and unsigned. The sender was presumed to be a PR representative or perhaps a mutual contact. It asked whether Perry would be open to a quiet reconciliation or, at the very least, to cease sharing information with the media. Perry did not reply. Instead, he handed the message to his legal team and moved on. And that, more than anything, terrified those closest to Meghan and Harry. Because when someone like Tyler Perry decides he's finished with you, he doesn't make noise. He makes moves. His silence is louder than any tabloid headline. And in Hollywood, silence from someone of Perry's stature means exile. His breaking point wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't publicized in an Instagram statement or dramatized in an interview. It was composed, deliberate. Quietly, Perry had drawn a line in the sand. He would no longer allow his name, his property, or his credibility to be used in service of anyone else's illusion. He didn't want to expose Meghan and Harry, but he refused to shield them anymore. What began as a kind gesture in a time of need had spiraled into one of the most high-profile betrayals in Perry's career. And while he never asked for the role of whistleblower, it was one he embraced when the truth was on the line. Because when you loan someone your sanctuary and they turn it into a set, the betrayal isn't just personal. It's public. And in Perry's world, truth always finds its way to the light, even when it has to walk through fire to get there. There's a moment when the tide shifts, subtle at first, like a breath caught in the throat of a nation watching two royals remake their identities. But eventually, the silence breaks. The narrative changes. The same media machine that once praised their escape begins asking hard questions. The same supporters who once defended them with zeal start to hesitate. And just like that, the illusion begins to fracture, not through scandalous headlines or legal trials, but through the slow erosion of public trust. That's exactly what happened in the wake of Tyler Perry's quiet but decisive rebuke. In the earliest days following Megxit, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were hailed as brave truth-tellers. They were the modern royals unshackled from the past, the couple who dared to leave the firm and chart their own course. Major American media outlets framed their story as a modern-day fairy tale, laced with drama, injustice, and eventual vindication. Oprah's interview became a cultural moment, viewed by tens of millions. Streaming platforms clamored for exclusive deals. Podcasts were launched, children's books released, and foundations born. And yet, the house of cards had been built too quickly, on a foundation that demanded unrelenting loyalty from the press and public. There was no space for questions, no room for scrutiny. The narrative was crafted so carefully, any crack was treated as an attack. But when Tyler Perry withdrew his support, when it became clear that not everything about the Montecito lifestyle was real, those long-suppressed questions erupted into the open. The first to break ranks were the tabloids, predictably aggressive, eager for blood. But what surprised many was the change in tone from more mainstream voices. Outlets like the New York Times, The Guardian, and CNN began running opinion pieces that questioned the couple's judgment, ethics, and long-term brand sustainability. Headlines that once praised their privacy journey now read with cautious cynicism. The royal rebranding. What's real and what's Hollywood? And have Harry and Meghan overplayed their hand? But the media was only the beginning. The fan disillusionment was far more revealing and far more painful for the couple's public image. These weren't trolls or critics. These were the loyal followers, the ones who had organized fundraisers for Archewell, the ones who defended Meghan from every tabloid headline, the ones who created tribute pages, moderated Reddit communities, and filled Twitter threads with heart emojis and quotes about courage. They felt blindsided. The sense of betrayal was rooted not in the idea that Harry and Meghan had rented a mansion or filmed in someone else's home, but that they had allowed the world to believe otherwise. They hadn't corrected the record. They had leveraged the illusion to secure more credibility, more admiration, more revenue. It wasn't about the property. It was about the honesty. Comments on social media began shifting overnight. A fan post celebrating their Montecito life now had replies asking, "But do they even live there?" One tweet praising their authenticity was met with skepticism. Authenticity doesn't require staging. Facebook groups and fan pages that had once posted daily affirmations now debated whether to continue supporting them at all. A major Meghan Markle fan account with over 800,000 followers suddenly went silent for 2 days. When they returned, it was with a cautious post that read, "Still love them. But maybe it's time we start asking questions too." Archewell's donations began to slow. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Two prominent nonprofit partners quietly removed references to the foundation from their homepages. A planned charity gala where Meghan was expected to appear was postponed indefinitely, without clear explanation. Behind the scenes, donors were asking for transparency. Where had their money gone, and how much of it was supporting real impact versus image maintenance? Then came the celebrity retreat. Not all at once. Not in dramatic fashion. But over days and weeks, subtle indicators appeared. Serena Williams, once a vocal defender and close friend, skipped a scheduled joint appearance. Ellen DeGeneres, who had previously posted support for Meghan, suddenly pivoted to other causes. Oprah Winfrey herself declined to comment on the Tyler Perry fallout during a red carpet appearance, saying only, "Sometimes stories need space." It was a polite way of saying, the shine had worn off. By now, late-night shows were poking fun. Monologues featured sly jabs. So Harry and Meghan's house was basically a timeshare, one comedian quipped. "Guess that's what happens when you give up the castle." The audience laughed, not maliciously, but knowingly. The couple had become fair game again. The most devastating shift, however, came from within their own carefully curated media circle. A trusted magazine that had once featured Meghan on its cover, highlighting her as a modern woman of grace and purpose, ran an editorial under a different tone. It asked, how much of the Meghan Markle brand is based on verifiable truth? The article didn't attack. It inquired. It analyzed. And that, for many, was worse than insult. It was a loss of faith. The podcast audience dwindled. Spotify executives began re-evaluating content projections. The couple's production company, Archewell Audio, was rumored to have missed multiple internal targets. A Netflix spokesperson, asked about the potential breach of location disclosure agreements, declined to comment. And still, Harry and Meghan said nothing. No statement. No clarification. Not even a denial. That silence, once seen as dignified restraint, now felt evasive. Supporters interpreted the silence as confirmation. Critics saw it as cowardice. Industry professionals interpreted it as brand paralysis. No matter the lens, the damage had been done. In a space where image is everything, the suggestion of manipulation, even without outright scandal, was enough to cast a shadow that would take years to dispel. It's easy to forget how quickly public opinion shifts. One moment, a figure is a cultural hero. The next, they are a question mark. That was the cruel reality now facing the Sussexes. Even those still loyal to the couple began rephrasing their allegiance. "I still support their right to live their life. One fan tweeted, "But I'm no longer sure I support how they went about it." That distinction, subtle as it is, marks a pivotal moment in the life cycle of public trust. The media backlash wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow leak, unrelenting, quiet, and deadly. And with each passing day, the pressure mounted. Harry and Meghan's brand was built on their ability to tell their truth. But now, with key elements of that truth exposed as curated, stylized, and misrepresented, the questions were louder than the answers. For a pair who had so masterfully managed their image, the silence now spoke volumes. Until this point, most of the damage had been circumstantial, frustrated speculation, quiet withdrawals of support, social media unease, and media tension simmering just below the boil. But then came the leak. Not a rumor, not an anonymous whisper on a gossip forum. This was different. This was verifiable, direct, and unmistakably damning. And when it dropped, it didn't just shake the Sussex brand, it fractured it completely. The source of the leak remains a mystery to this day, though few in the entertainment industry believe it came from outside Tyler Perry's reach. Whether it was someone from his legal team, an inner circle advisor, or a studio executive he trusted implicitly, the result was unmistakable. A series of internal documents, email threads, location reports, and private messages that confirmed what many had only suspected, that Harry and Meghan had intentionally presented someone else's property as their own, and had done so to secure public goodwill, brand legitimacy, and narrative control. The contents of the leak were devastating. The first batch of documents included scheduling emails between Archwell Productions and Netflix executives. Among them was a clear reference to filming days labeled set Montecito residence, which, according to one timestamp and GPS metadata later examined by tech journalists, aligned with Tyler Perry's estate. Not any property registered to the Sussexes. That alone would have raised eyebrows. But it was just the beginning. Another document, more revealing than the rest, was a memo from a production coordinator outlining a style and staging list for scenes filmed on a specific week. It included instructions to rearrange certain furniture, import a child's toy chest from an LA-based rental agency, and add more personal photos on visible surfaces, family-friendly, soft-light aesthetic, ideally 5 to 7 frames. At the bottom, a postscript added, "Verify prop return within 48 hours of wrap. Do not tag location publicly." None of these instructions are illegal in the world of film, but they are profoundly misleading when used in a documentary promoted as a raw, honest glimpse into one's private home life. The most damning exchange, however, was in a brief but curt email from Meghan herself, or at least one sent from her direct account according to cybersecurity experts who authenticated the metadata. The message was addressed to the docuseries creative director and read, in part, "Can we keep the location reference vague in the final cut? Just our California home should suffice. Viewers don't need geography to feel connection." That sentence, simple as it seems, collapsed the wall between performance and pretense, and the internet exploded. Within hours of the leak's appearance on a mid-tier entertainment site, major platforms picked up the story. TMZ ran it first, followed by Variety, Deadline, and eventually the New York Times. Journalists debated the ethics. Cultural commentators questioned the intent. Legal experts asked whether Netflix or donors to Archwell had a case for misrepresentation. But the public? They didn't debate. They reacted. The hashtag #MansionGate began trending across social media. Memes flooded timelines, some mocking, some furious. TikTok creators stitched together clips from the documentary and compared them with now-confirmed images from Perry's home. One viral video titled, "Exposing the Set," clocked over 12 million views in 3 days. Viewers pointed out rugs, wall decor, lamps, and garden hedges that now looked like borrowed set pieces in the light of the truth. But the most surprising fallout came not from fans or media, but from those within the industry. A veteran director tweeted, "There's a line between privacy and fiction. Documentaries, even stylized ones, demand truth. You don't stage someone else's home and call it your own." A Netflix insider was quoted anonymously saying, "We were told they wanted to give us unprecedented access. That's how the show was greenlit. We didn't know we were walking into an illusion." The same week, Archwell's PR firm received over a dozen formal inquiries from journalists, foundations, and former brand partners requesting clarification on the mansion issue. Rather than respond, the PR firm deflected with a brief statement. The Duke and Duchess remain committed to sharing their story in meaningful ways. No further comment at this time. Silence again. And just like that, the floodgates opened. Former staffers from Archewell who had previously kept quiet began offering anonymous insights to reporters. One revealed that the couple had been deeply concerned about appearing too nomadic in the early stages of their public transition to the United States. They felt a stable home image would anchor their brand, the staffer said. They didn't think it would matter where the scenes were filmed as long as the emotion was real. But in the world of brand storytelling, optics are everything. The leak made it abundantly clear. Harry and Meghan had deliberately manipulated the context of their home life, using someone else's estate to simulate the life they told the world they had built on their own terms. And worse, they'd monetized that illusion across multiple channels: Netflix, podcasts, book tours, and charity initiatives that used that imagery to inspire trust and emotional investment. Trust, once broken, is hard to regain. And this wasn't just broken, it was shattered. Supporters who had already begun questioning the mansion narrative now saw their worst fears confirmed. They had not just been misled, they had been emotionally manipulated. They had been asked to donate to a cause, support a couple, and champion a story that was staged on someone else's property. One former Archewell donor summed it up on Twitter: "I gave because I believed in their honesty. Now I feel like I funded a costume change." The financial implications began to ripple outward. A legal watchdog organization initiated a formal request for Archewell's financial records. A Los Angeles-based real estate law firm published a piece exploring whether deceptive use of imagery in donation campaigns constituted fraud. Several podcast sponsors requested private meetings to renegotiate contracts, and one quietly pulled their logo from the Sussex Foundation's partnership page. But the most jarring reaction came from Tyler Perry's own legal team. According to sources close to the situation, Perry's attorneys began preparing documents that would allow for the full release of the location agreement terms, if challenged publicly. This move was widely seen as a protective measure, signaling Perry's readiness to make his side of the story irrefutable if pressed. It wasn't an attack. It was a declaration. The truth is no longer negotiable. And in the end, that's what the leak accomplished. It took what had previously been hearsay, speculation, and insider gossip, and turned it into undeniable, documented evidence. The narrative Harry and Meghan had carefully constructed, one of authenticity, independence, and self-made stability, had been irreversibly tainted by a truth far more theatrical than their Netflix special. They hadn't built a home. They'd built a set. And in doing so, they hadn't just deceived their audience. They had lost control of their story. At the peak of her post-royal journey, Meghan Markle was hailed as a cultural phoenix, rising from the ashes of monarchical tradition to become a beacon of modern womanhood. She embodied resilience, elegance, and quiet rebellion. Her carefully curated public image leaned into her intellect, her charity work, her wellness, and her message of empowerment. And for a time, it worked. Meghan was everywhere, on podcast charts, in Vogue spreads, and in heartfelt interviews about motherhood and mental health. But the fallout from the leaked mansion scandal and Tyler Perry's unmistakable shift hit her brand like a tidal wave, and unlike Harry, who remained in the background, Meghan was at the center of the storm. It wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a reputational earthquake. Meghan had built her post-royal persona on the foundation of truth. Not fact, necessarily, but emotional truth. "This is my story," she told Oprah, eyes glistening, "and I have a right to tell it." It was a sentiment that resonated with millions. The world wanted to believe her, not just because she was charming or beautiful, but because she made people feel like she was telling a truth they themselves had been silenced from telling. But that credibility was now in freefall. When the leak broke and the media ran wild with details, the first cracks appeared in places previously deemed untouchable. Progressive media platforms, lifestyle bloggers, and high-profile influencers who had long championed Meghan's journey. These were not critics from traditional tabloids or conservative outlets. These were her supporters, her demographic: young, multicultural, socially conscious, fiercely protective of women's rights, and deeply distrustful of institutions like the royal family. And they were confused. A viral blog post on a prominent women's platform captured the sudden shift. We believed in Meghan because she asked for transparency, because she called out manipulation. But what happens when she's the one doing the manipulating? The tone grew darker by the day. Podcasters who had once gushed about her memoir began issuing soft retractions. Wellness influencers, who had previously lauded her lifestyle as aspirational, began questioning the curated nature of her brand. One well-known activist and author wrote on Instagram, "It's difficult to preach authenticity from a rented stage and a borrowed garden." It wasn't the house. It was the feeling of betrayal that came with it. For someone whose image hinged on emotional integrity, even a single revelation of falsity felt like a crack in a stained glass window, once beautiful, now permanently flawed. The very platforms that once embraced her were now revisiting past claims. Was her letter to Congress about paid leave embellished? Were the anecdotes in her children's book inspired by real moments or fabricated imagery? Had her podcast interviews been scripted more heavily than disclosed? The internet, ruthless in its attention to detail, began compiling inconsistencies. A Reddit thread titled "Meghan, the Myth versus the Market" drew over 10,000 comments, many from former supporters. Screenshots from interviews were dissected, zoomed backgrounds geolocated, statements matched against public records. There was no single smoking gun, only an avalanche of small, troubling questions. And while Harry remained mostly protected in this moment, his royal blood, reserved public persona, and lingering sympathy shielding him, Meghan bore the brunt of the scrutiny. She had always been the face of their public campaign. She had narrated the story, defined the mission, carried the emotion. Now, she carried the blame. As this reputational collapse gained speed, Archwell's team reportedly scrambled behind the scenes. Crisis meetings were held. Media consultants were brought in. PR strategists suggested a redemptive move. Perhaps a heartfelt statement, or even a sit-down with a sympathetic interviewer. But Meghan, according to insiders, refused. She believed silence was the best defense. She hoped it would pass. It didn't. A scheduled speaking engagement at a women's empowerment summit was quietly canceled by organizers. They cited scheduling conflicts, but insiders revealed a different story. Sponsors were nervous. Attendees were divided. The optics had shifted. A woman once seen as the victim of systemic bullying was now viewed, by many, as a master of narrative manipulation. Worse, the archetype Meghan had so carefully embraced, that of the misunderstood heroine, began to dissolve. Where once she had drawn comparisons to Princess Diana, now she was being compared to calculated brand influencers, media manipulators, and even disgraced public figures who had fabricated elements of their life story. This wasn't about race, nor was it simply about royalty. This was about perceived integrity.